Hey, my name is Tessa McKinley. I'm 27 years old, and this is my story. You know how people say holidays bring families together? Well, for me, Christmas was the final blow that tore mine apart. The voicemail I received just 5 days before Christmas didn't just cancel the holiday, it erased the last bit of warmth I still held for my father. He said, "Christmas is canceled. My lawyer will call." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just that cold message that shattered something in me. I didn't reply. I just acted. But before you judge me, let me take you back a little. Because stories like mine don't start with a voicemail. They start with years of silence, quiet betrayals, and moments when you ignore your own pain just to keep the peace. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story is resonating with you so far, make sure to like and subscribe to follow the rest of this powerful journey. I was born and raised in Springfield, Missouri, a town that feels like a big neighborhood, where everyone knows your business and smiles at you at the grocery store whether they like you or not. My mom, Ellen, died when I was 12. A car crash on icy roads one January morning. That kind of grief matures you overnight. My dad, Gary, was never the same after that, and neither was I. He became quieter, more focused on work, less present, less everything, but I didn't mind at first. I thought maybe that was just his way of coping. I told myself he was doing his best. I told myself a lot of things growing up. I was the kid who cleaned the dishes without being asked, made honor roll, applied for scholarships, and never got into trouble. I did all that hoping he'd notice, hoping he'd love me the way I needed, but he didn't. By the time I was 18, we were more like two people who happened to share a house than a father and daughter. When I left for college, University of Missouri, I half expected him to stop me, hug me, tell me he'd miss me. He didn't. He handed me a check for $500 and said, "Don't waste it." That was our goodbye. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest of my expenses, took out loans I'm still paying off, and graduated with a degree in communications. I moved back to Springfield because I wanted to start fresh, maybe even fix things with him. I still believed we could have something real. I still had hope, but hope, as I would learn, is a dangerous thing. It was during that first year back that I met Rachel. She was working at a law firm downtown, doing paralegal work while she studied for the bar. She was funny, driven, and unapologetically honest. We became fast friends, and it was through Rachel that I found out something that changed everything. One night, we were sitting at her place after a long day. She was scrolling through her firm's case files, organizing for the next week, and I saw a name that made my heart skip. Gary McKinley versus McKinley Estate Holdings. I laughed. "That's my dad's name." Rachel frowned. "Seriously?" She opened the file. My dad had quietly filed a legal claim to take over property assets that were part of my mom's side of the family. Land that she'd inherited from her father. Land that was supposed to be mine. Land my mom had always told me would one day belong to me because it's our roots, Tess. He never told me. Never asked. Never even mentioned it. He had filed documents declaring me estranged and non-participatory, claiming I had no interest in the estate. He used legal language to erase me from what little my mother had left behind. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at my bedroom ceiling until the sun came up, my chest heavy with rage and betrayal. I couldn't understand how he could do that. But the answer, I think, is simple. Because he never really saw me as his daughter. Maybe he never had. And that brings us to this December. It was supposed to be the first Christmas we'd spend together in 5 years. He'd called in November out of the blue, saying we should try to reconnect. Said he'd cook dinner. Said he missed me. I wanted to believe it. I even told Rachel I felt like maybe things were turning around. I bought a new dress. I planned what dessert to bring. I bought him a gift, an old photo of me and my mom at Silver Dollar City, framed in walnut. I thought maybe he'd cry. Maybe he'd say he was sorry. Maybe. Then came the voicemail. No explanation. No apology. Just, "Christmas is canceled. My lawyer will call." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, holding my phone like it might bite me, listening to his voice over and over until I didn't hear words anymore. Just the echo of everything I'd tried to fix, collapsing. The thing about pain is, when you've held on to it for too long, It doesn't explode. It calcifies. It becomes quiet, strategic, focused. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to let him take anything else from me. Not my mom's land, not my dignity, not my silence. You see, I had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. All those years of working hard, keeping receipts, asking questions, building quiet networks through Rachel and others in town, it was all leading here. He thought I was the kind of daughter who would walk away, but he was wrong. And what happened next would change everything, because I wasn't going to fight him in court. I had a better idea. I'll tell you how it all started, but not with lawyers, not with shouting, with something much, much quieter. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had even begun to rise. The voicemail still lingered in my ears, but now it wasn't pain I felt. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop trying to change someone who never wanted to see you in the first place. I pulled out the old file box I kept in the back of my closet, the one labeled simply Mom. It was filled with everything I'd gathered over the years: copies of deeds, handwritten notes she left behind, photos of the land, newspaper clippings about my grandfather's farm, even a voice message she'd left me just weeks before her accident. She always told me to protect what was ours. That morning, I finally understood why. By the time I made it to Rachel's office, the receptionist was just unlocking the door. I didn't even wait for coffee. I walked straight in, dropped the box on her desk, and said, "We're not letting him win." Rachel looked at me carefully. "Are you sure? Because once this starts—" I cut her off. "He fired the first shot. Now I'm responding." We spent the entire day going through the documents. Rachel had already pulled my father's filings, but now we were digging deeper, into timelines, inconsistencies, omissions. And there were a lot. He had forged a letter that claimed I'd refused to participate in the management of the estate. We found inconsistencies in the notarizations. There were missing disclosures, misstatements about my current residence, and even an inaccurate affidavit claiming he had no living descendants. I was literally erased from paper, like I never existed. Rachel leaned back in her chair that evening, exhausted but burning with determination. "We have enough to punch back, but I think we can do more than defend." That's when I told her my plan. See, legal battles can be long and expensive, and while I had Rachel on my side, my dad had money. He had lawyers who played dirty, but I had something else. My mother's legacy, the respect of the community, and people who still remembered what kind of man he was before he became the cold stranger who sent that voicemail. Springfield isn't the kind of town where you can burn bridges quietly. Word gets around, and I was counting on that. I started visiting people, quietly, respectfully. Mr. Simmons, who used to work the neighboring property and remembered my grandfather's farm fondly. Mrs. Donahue, who taught me and my mom how to can peaches in her kitchen. Even Pastor Keller, who'd been at my mom's funeral and remembered my father skipping the service because of a business emergency. They all had stories. And some of them had documents, photos, notes, even an old community land use agreement my mom had signed with other families before she died. Things my father had either ignored or pretended never existed. I documented everything, and I didn't tell a soul what I was really planning. But I did start speaking, not about the legal case, but about my mother, about her values, about the land she loved. I shared stories in the local newsletter, participated in a community podcast about family legacies, and even started a small blog where I posted old photos of the farm and stories from my childhood. People began sharing it, commenting, remembering. My father, of course, noticed. He sent a formal cease and desist through his attorney, claiming I was damaging his reputation and interfering with legal proceedings. I didn't even flinch. Rachel crafted the response herself, calm, professional, and laced with just enough quiet strength to send a clear message. We were done playing nice. Then came the escalation. One morning, I walked out to my car and found the tires slashed. No note, no witnesses. I didn't file a report. I just replaced the tires and moved on. 2 days later, someone anonymously submitted a tip to the city claiming I was trespassing on restricted land. An inspector came by, but he was one of my former classmates from high school. He laughed as he explained the complaint and said, "I think someone's getting nervous." I knew it was my dad. I knew he was losing control. Then came the phone call. Not from him, but from my aunt, his sister who lived in St. Louis. We hadn't spoken in years, but she called out of the blue and said, "Tessa, I don't know what's going on between you and your dad, but I found something you need to see." I drove to St. Louis the next morning, heart racing the whole way. We sat at her kitchen table, and she pulled out a worn manila envelope. Inside were handwritten letters from my mom to my aunt, written during the last year of her life. One of them stopped my breath. It read, "If anything ever happens to me, please make sure Tessa knows that the land belongs to her. Gary has been asking questions about the title, and I don't trust his intentions." I stared at the page for what felt like hours, and then I cried. Not because of the betrayal, but because my mother had seen it coming and tried to protect me. Armed with those letters, I returned to Springfield more resolute than ever. Rachel read them, nodded, and said, "This changes everything." We filed an emergency motion to invalidate my father's claim on the land, citing fraud, suppression of key documents, and false testimony. The letters were authenticated and submitted as primary evidence. We also included affidavits from community members who had supported my story. My father's legal team tried to delay, tried to bury us in paperwork, but we kept moving. I didn't rest. I couldn't. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the pain started turning into something else. Purpose. I was no longer trying to get back at him. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. Not just the land, but the story, the truth, my place in the legacy my mother had fought to preserve. Then, one evening, while I was driving back from another meeting with Rachel, I saw him, my father, sitting alone on the porch of his house, the same house where I grew up. For a moment, I slowed down. For a moment, I thought about stopping, but then I remembered the voicemail. "Christmas is canceled. My lawyer will call." That was his final word, and I had already answered, without saying a thing. I drove on. The court hearing was scheduled for the second week of January, but something was already shifting. People were talking. His name no longer carried the same respect. Business associates were pulling back. Even the local newspaper ran a piece about the battle for McKinley land, and though it tried to stay neutral, the comment section made it clear where people's hearts were. My father was losing more than land. He was losing his image, and for a man like him, that was the deepest cut of all. But the real blow was still coming, and I was ready. The morning of the hearing arrived like a storm front. Quiet at first, but thick with pressure. I woke up at 5:30, long before my alarm, unable to sleep. Rachel had texted me just after midnight with one final checklist, but I'd already memorized every item on it. I got dressed slowly, each layer feeling like armor. Dark green blazer, cream blouse, black pants, low, solid heels, hair pulled back tight. No jewelry except the locket my mom had given me when I was 10. Inside it was a photo of her holding me as a baby. I kissed it once before snapping it shut. I didn't want strength today. I needed resolve. The courthouse in Springfield was buzzing when I arrived. There were more people than I'd expected. Some reporters, a few faces from church, a couple of my old high school classmates lingering by the front steps, pretending they just happened to be walking by. My father arrived 15 minutes late. He stepped out of his shiny black sedan in a charcoal gray suit, flanked by two attorneys in tailored coats. He looked thinner than I remembered, or maybe just smaller. Our eyes met across the lot, and for a second I felt nothing. No panic, no ache, just a strange, hollow calm. He turned away first. Inside, the courtroom was chilly, even under the artificial lights. Rachel stood beside me at the plaintiff's table, organizing our materials like a machine. She looked over and whispered, "Whatever happens, you've already won more than he ever expected you to." The judge was a woman named Dolores Whitman. I didn't know her personally, but her reputation was solid, fair, sharp, no tolerance for games. I liked that. She reviewed our filings in silence for several minutes before finally looking up and saying, "Let's begin." My father's attorney launched first, arguing that he had full legal right to the land due to lack of engagement on my part. He painted a picture of me as an absent, irresponsible daughter who had never shown interest in family property and was now creating drama to disrupt my father's business affairs. I kept my face still as he spoke, but inside I burned. When Rachel stood, it was like watching a sword drawn from its sheath, calm, clean, precise. She began with the letters. She read one aloud, my mother's warning from all those years ago. The courtroom was silent except for Rachel's voice and the occasional clack of a typing clerk. Then she moved on to the inconsistencies in the paperwork, the testimonies from neighbors, the false claims of my estrangement. She showed photographs of me visiting the land in the years after my mom's death, some of which were dated. She submitted the voice recording from my mom saved on my phone. The room was gripped. Even the judge leaned forward. Then Rachel said something I wasn't expecting. With the court's permission, the plaintiff would like to make a statement. The judge nodded. I stood slowly, heart pounding. My palms were damp, but my voice didn't shake. My name is Tessa McKinley. This land isn't just acres of dirt. It's my mother's legacy, my grandfather's hard work. It's where I learned to ride a bike, where my mom and I used to sit under the maple tree and talk about what kind of person I wanted to become. My father has tried to erase me from this legacy, not because I was absent, but because I was inconvenient, because I remind him of the truth. And I think deep down, that's why he's so desperate to win. But I'm not a ghost. I'm here, and I'm done being silent. I sat down. The room stayed quiet for another beat longer than usual. The judge adjourned for a lunch recess, but I barely touched the food Rachel brought me. My stomach was twisting. My father never looked at me once. He stared at his notes, at the walls, anywhere but my direction. After the break, the judge called us back. She summarized the evidence presented, fairly I thought, but with a certain tone when referencing the forged affidavit and the letters my mother wrote. Then she said words I would remember for the rest of my life. The court finds substantial evidence of intentional deception in Mr. McKinley's filing. The estate transfer is hereby nullified. Full ownership of the McKinley property is awarded to Ms. Tessa McKinley with immediate effect. I didn't react right away. I just blinked, frozen in place. Rachel squeezed my hand once before she began packing our things. The judge stood and exited. People began murmuring. My father remained seated. When I finally stood, I caught one last look at him. He didn't seem angry or shocked, just defeated. As we walked out of the courtroom, someone tapped my shoulder. It was a woman I didn't recognize at first. Gray hair in a neat bun, floral scarf tucked into her coat. I knew your mom, she said. She used to buy strawberries from my stand. She always said you'd do great things one day. I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in weeks. Thank you, I whispered. Outside, the winter air bit at my cheeks, but it felt like the first breath I'd taken in years. Rachel walked me to my car and said, "It's not over, you know. He could still appeal." I nodded. Let him. That night I drove out to the land. It was just as I remembered. Quiet, still, wrapped in snow. The fence was falling apart. The old barn had lost more paint, but the maple tree was still there, bare and reaching toward the stars. I stepped out of the car and walked across the field, boots crunching softly against frozen grass. I stood beneath the tree and whispered, "I did it, Mom." The wind picked up for just a second, brushing my cheek like a memory. Then I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my coat pocket. It was the original community agreement, now officially recorded under my name. I tucked it into the hollow of the tree, in the same spot where my mom once hid letters to me as a kid. It felt right. In the following weeks, news of the case spread quickly. The blog traffic doubled. People reached out, offering help, wanting to volunteer, asking if I planned to restore the land. I hadn't decided yet. I was still recovering, still trying to understand what this victory meant now that I actually had it. My father didn't appeal. Instead, he disappeared from Springfield. His house was sold quietly. Rumors said he moved to Kansas City. I didn't try to find out. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed him anything. Not a conversation, not forgiveness, not closure. All I owed was to myself, and to the woman who raised me to stand up when others tried to silence me. I kept going back to the land every week, cleaning a little, planning a little, dreaming a little. It was no longer just about revenge. It was about rebuilding, because healing isn't always soft or gentle. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it starts in a courtroom, and sometimes it ends under an old maple tree in the quiet heart of Missouri, where a daughter finally becomes the author of her own legacy. The weeks following the hearing felt like waking up from a long, dark sleep. I hadn't realized just how heavy everything had been until it started to lift. One breath, one sunrise at a time. Owning the land didn't magically erase the pain, but it changed something deep inside me. For once, I wasn't just reacting to life. I was building something of my own. Springfield was still small enough that people noticed. Some sent letters, others left baked goods on my porch like it was the 1950s. And almost every time I went into town, someone stopped to say they were proud of me. I'd always hated being the center of attention, but this was different. It wasn't fame, it was belonging. It was people saying, "We saw what happened, and we're with you." The land needed work. So much work. The farmhouse had been empty for years, and my dad hadn't maintained it. The roof sagged, windows were cracked, the porch steps groaned with every footstep, but somehow, that only made me love it more. It felt like something I could pour myself into, like it had survived just long enough to come back to life under the right hands. I started spending more time there, sometimes alone, sometimes with Rachel or a friend from town. We cleared out debris, scrubbed the walls, repaired furniture, sanded floors. I found boxes of old photographs in the attic, some of them water-damaged, but many still intact. There was one of my mom holding me as a toddler, standing right by the maple tree, both of us grinning at something out of frame. I framed it and hung it by the front door. Little by little, the house started to feel less haunted. And I did too. One chilly Saturday, I was on the porch repainting the railings when I saw a car pull up the gravel driveway. It was an older model sedan, dark blue, unfamiliar. A man stepped out, late 50s maybe, tall, broad-shouldered, with gray at his temples and a nervous look in his eyes. "Tessa McKinley?" he asked, voice careful. I nodded, setting my brush down on the rim of the paint can. "That's me. I'm Nathan. I worked with your grandfather years ago. Heard you'd taken the place back." I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded again. He seemed to take that as permission to continue. "I've got some of your family's old equipment in my shed," he said. "Your mom loaned it to me before she passed. I meant to return it, but then, well, time passed. Figured now's the right time." He opened the trunk. Inside were boxes of tools, some rusted, some neatly wrapped. There was an old hand-crank corn grinder, a wood-burned sign that read McKinley Grove, and a faded blanket I recognized from family camping trips. I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, "Thank you." He helped me carry the boxes inside, and before he left, he turned and said something that stuck with me. "Your mother was proud of this land. She'd be even prouder now." I believed him. Over the next month, I threw myself into the work. I spent long days restoring, planning, dreaming. I started sketching out ideas for turning the land into something more, a retreat space, maybe, or a small orchard. I didn't want to commercialize it. I wanted it to stay sacred, but I also didn't want it to be forgotten again. I wanted it to breathe. I began documenting the restoration process on the blog I'd started during the court case. I wasn't expecting much, but to my surprise, the posts gained traction. People started commenting, sharing stories about their own family lands, their own fractured legacies. One woman from Arkansas wrote, "I didn't fight for my mother's land when my uncle tried to claim it. Reading your story makes me wish I had." Another said, "Your strength is helping me heal from something I thought I'd buried." And I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was bigger than me. One day in early spring, Rachel came by with a picnic basket and a few bottles of lemonade. We sat on the porch, feet up on the railing, watching the wind move through the trees like old whispers. "You ever think about selling?" she asked casually. I turned and looked at her. "Not a chance." She smiled. "Didn't think so. Just had to ask." We sat in silence for a while, the good kind. Comfortable, familiar. Then she said, "You've changed, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "In a good way?" "In the best way," she said. "Before all this, you were strong, but you didn't know it. Now you do." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was true. There had been a time when I measured my worth by how much space I took up in my father's world, by how often he called, by whether or not he showed up. I spent years chasing his approval, shrinking myself just to stay close to someone who barely noticed me. But standing on that land now, with the wind in my hair and paint under my fingernails, I felt grounded, full, like I belonged to myself for the first time. I started organizing community work days on the weekends. People came, some I knew, some I didn't. They helped with fencing, planting, cleaning. We laughed. We told stories. We built something together. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what we were growing, what we were becoming. And then, just when things felt like they were settling, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was from my father. He didn't write much, just a few lines. I saw the article in the paper. I suppose I deserved what happened. I won't contact you again, but I wanted you to know. I was wrong. About everything. There was no signature. Just that. I read it 3 times, my fingers shaking, and then I folded it neatly and tucked it into the back of my journal. Not because I needed his apology, but because I wanted to remember how far I'd come without it. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't something you gave someone else. It was something you gave yourself, so you could finally be free. That night, I walked out to the maple tree and sat beneath it for a long time. The stars were sharp above me, the kind of clear that only comes on quiet, windless nights. I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd rebuilt, and I made a promise to myself. No more shrinking, no more silence, no more waiting for someone else to define my worth. I was Tessa McKinley, daughter of Ellen, keeper of this land, and I was just getting started. Spring arrived in Springfield with a kind of quiet grace, the kind that creeps up on you until one day the cold lifts and the air smells like promise. The land was changing, budding, softening, breathing again, and so was I. But with growth always comes resistance. I thought the storm had passed, that the worst of the fight was over. I didn't realize the real reckoning was still ahead. It started with a phone call from Rachel on a rainy Thursday morning. I was in the barn organizing tools when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. Tessa, I just got a notice from the clerk's office. Your father filed a petition. I froze. A petition? For what? He's contesting the ruling. Not directly, he's trying a new angle. Claims he was coerced into withdrawing the appeal. Says he has new evidence that invalidates the original title transfer from your grandfather to your mom. The words hit me like ice down my spine. He's trying to claw it back, I said flatly. Rachel sighed. Looks that way. I felt my stomach twist. I had let my guard down. For the first time in months, I had allowed myself to believe he was gone, that the fight was behind me. But of course he wasn't finished. My father wasn't the kind of man who left quietly. He was the kind who waited until the dust settled, then struck again when no one was looking. Rachel walked me through our options. We could respond. We could challenge. We could build an even stronger case. But what she didn't say, and what we both knew, was that this wasn't about legal footing anymore. It was personal. It always had been. The land had never really been the prize for him. I was, or rather, control over me, ownership of the last thing my mother ever gave me. And now that I had taken it back, he was coming for it not because he wanted it, but because he couldn't stand to see me keep it. I hung up the phone and stared out into the field. The maple tree was in full bloom now, its branches heavy with new leaves, its trunk strong and unshaken by the wind. I wondered how many storms it had weathered in its lifetime, how many times it had bent but never broken. I walked out to it, stood beneath its branches, and leaned my palm against the bark. I won't let him take you, I whispered. And just like that, the fire in me returned. Rachel filed a formal response the next day. We included updated documentation, additional community statements, and the recording of my father's own voicemail, the one where he told me Christmas was canceled and his lawyer would call. That message, in all its cold finality, was now Exhibit A. We weren't just defending anymore. We were drawing a line in the sand. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. This time, it wasn't in the county courthouse, but in a district building downtown. A larger room, more people, more eyes. And my father, he was different too. He arrived with a new lawyer, slick, young, confident in a way that reeked of ego. My father's suit was darker, his expression more controlled, but the bitterness in his eyes was unmistakable. He didn't even pretend to look remorseful. The judge, an older man named Fields, had a reputation for being thorough and brutally fair. He opened the hearing with a brief summary of the case history, then asked each side to present their new evidence. My father's lawyer tried to twist the narrative. He claimed my grandfather's will was unclear, that there had been a miscommunication about the intent of the property transfer. He said my mother had manipulated the situation to keep my father out of the family's assets, that she'd misled him about the title, and that the court had been misinformed. It was a performance. That's all it was, full of dramatic pauses, exaggerated language, and vague accusations. But then it was Rachel's turn. She stood slowly, adjusted her glasses, and spoke in a voice that didn't rise, didn't waver, but cut through the room like a blade. The attempt to rewrite history here is not only offensive to my client, but to the memory of her late mother, Ellen McKinley, who documented everything, who left behind legal, personal, and emotional proof of her intent for this land. What we're witnessing is not a legal argument. It's a personal vendetta, a father trying to punish his daughter for standing up to him. Then she played the voicemail. The judge leaned forward, listening carefully as my father's voice filled the room. Christmas is canceled. My lawyer will call. The coldness, the finality, the lack of any human warmth. Rachel paused the audio, then looked directly at the judge. This is not the voice of someone who was coerced. This is the voice of someone who chose to wage war on his own family. The judge asked to see the timeline again. Rachel handed over a binder, and I watched as he flipped through it, page by page. Then he turned to my father. "Mr. McKinley, do you wish to make a statement?" My father stood. He looked older now, not in the way of years, but in the way of people who have spent too long feeding their bitterness. "I was misled," he said. "I was grieving. I wasn't in my right mind when I signed those documents. I've since realized mistakes were made. I only want what's fair." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what would you consider fair, sir?" My father hesitated, then said quietly, "Joint ownership." I felt my chest tighten. Rachel didn't flinch. The judge looked down, made a few notes, then said, "Thank you. I'll issue my decision shortly." We were dismissed. Outside, the air was thick with tension. People gathered in small groups, talking in hushed voices. My father walked past me without a word. His lawyer gave me a tight smile, too smug, too rehearsed. Rachel leaned in. "He knows this is his last shot." I nodded. "So do I." We didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, the judge released his decision. It was 3 pages long, but I only needed to hear the first line. "The court finds no grounds for reversal or modification of the original ruling." I read it twice, then again, slower this time. The land was mine, again, completely, finally, indisputably mine. There would be no more hearings, no more filings, no more fights. The final blow had been dealt, and I hadn't thrown it with anger, but with truth. Rachel brought over champagne that night, but I only took a few sips. What I really wanted was to walk the field. So I did, alone, beneath the stars. I stood under the maple tree, looked up through its branches and whispered, "It's over." And it was. But not because the court said so, because I had chosen to let go. Not of the land, not of justice, but of the weight of him. I had won, not just the case, not just the property, but myself. The days after the final ruling felt different, not louder or more exciting, just still. There was a peace in the air I hadn't felt since before my mother died. A quiet that didn't feel like absence, but like space. Space to breathe, space to build, space to belong. I didn't celebrate with parties or post a triumphant victory online. That wasn't who I was anymore. I had walked through fire, yes, but I wasn't the kind of person who stood on the ashes and bragged. I was the kind who planted something new, the kind who let the roots do the talking. The letter came in mid-April, tucked into my mailbox between a seed catalog and a local newsletter. There was no return address this time either, but I knew the handwriting. My father's. It was longer than the first, and typed this time. Clean, distant, but still his. Tessa. I read the ruling. I suppose it was inevitable. I'm sure you think of me as a villain in your story, and maybe I am. Maybe I always was. I've told myself for years that I was doing what needed to be done, that business and survival and legacy meant hard choices, that you wouldn't understand. But I see now that the choices I made weren't about legacy. They were about fear, about control, about not wanting to feel like I had lost everything after your mother died. She was the only person who ever saw me clearly, and losing her cracked something I never repaired. I didn't know how to love what she left behind without trying to possess it, and I didn't know how to face you without seeing her eyes. You didn't deserve any of it. I know this letter doesn't fix anything. I know I've lost the right to ask for anything more from you, but I hope, someday, when you walk your land and feel her presence, you might remember that once, I was a man she loved. I'm sorry, Gary. I read it once, then again, then folded it quietly and slid it into the same wooden box where I kept her letters, the deed, the newspaper articles, and the photo of us under the maple tree. It didn't make me cry. It didn't make me angry. It just settled into place like the last puzzle piece in a picture that no longer hurt to look at. I never wrote back. Instead, I returned to the land. That spring, I started clearing a section of the back field that had long since grown wild. With help from a few friends and volunteers from town, we built a greenhouse out of reclaimed wood and old windows. I planted herbs, tomatoes, and wildflowers. I let the soil guide me, and in turn, it began to give back. We started hosting small community workshops on Saturdays. How to grow your own food, how to compost, how to preserve fruits. Local families came, sometimes with their kids in tow. There was laughter again on that land, not just mine, real shared joy. And with every weekend that passed, I watched the space become something more than just an inheritance. It became a place of healing, of memory, of forward motion. I kept Rachel close. She became more than just my legal champion. She was my confidant, my sister in arms. And sometimes, when the weight of it all returned in quiet waves, the person who reminded me why I'd fought in the first place. "You made your own map," she said one evening while we were drinking tea on the porch. "Most people follow one someone else drew, but you built your own compass and followed that instead." I thought about that for a long time, because she was right. When you grow up in someone else's shadow, it's easy to forget that you have your own light. I had spent years believing I needed my father's recognition, his validation, his permission to step into something more. But I didn't. I never did. The night before what would have been my mom's 60th birthday, I lit a lantern and walked the length of the land barefoot. The grass was soft under my feet, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of blooming things. At the edge of the field, I set the lantern down and looked up at the stars. "I hope you see it now," I whispered. "What I've done, what I've built, what I've become." Somewhere in the rustle of leaves, I imagined I heard her answer. Not in words, but in the feeling that bloomed in my chest like warmth returning to a numb place. Forgiveness, I'd learned, doesn't always come all at once. Sometimes it's layered, like the rings inside a tree. Sometimes it's not even about the other person. Sometimes it's just about choosing not to carry the bitterness anymore, about laying it down, gently, and stepping into something freer. The town started calling it McKinley Grove again, the way it had back when my grandfather owned it. I didn't correct them. I liked the sound of it. I liked the idea that some names could be reclaimed, that even legacies marked by pain could be rewritten. I started journaling again. Not about the court case or my father or the fight, but about the land, what was growing, what I was learning. I wrote about the birds that nested under the eaves of the barn, the way the sunrise painted the sky in watercolor strokes, the quiet companionship of building something with your hands. Sometimes I'd share those entries on the blog. Sometimes I'd keep them just for me. One afternoon, a teenage girl came by with her mother during one of the open house days. She looked shy, kept to herself, but after the tour, she lingered near the edge of the porch. When I approached, she finally said, "My dad left last year, took everything. My mom says we're starting over, but it still feels like nothing's really ours. Then we came here and it just felt safe." I bent down, looked her in the eye, and said, "That's what this place is for." Because it was. Not just a sanctuary for me, but for anyone who needed to believe in second chances. And that became my mission, not just to protect what was mine, but to offer it as proof that even the deepest wounds could become fertile ground. The land didn't just heal me, it transformed me. It taught me how to stand, how to forgive, how to rise. And one day, long after the court papers had yellowed and the headlines had faded, I walked the perimeter of McKinley Grove with a new sense of peace. I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was home, truly home. And I knew, deep down, my story wasn't just about loss or revenge or even survival. It was about reclamation, of land, of voice, of self. 3 years later, the land doesn't look anything like it did when I first returned. The barn stands tall with fresh red paint, its roof reinforced with the help of a few retired carpenters from town who offered their labor for the price of lemonade and pie. The greenhouse now yields more food than I can eat alone, so I donate baskets of tomatoes, squash, herbs, and berries to the local shelter. Children come by on Saturdays to help plant seeds, their fingers dirty with earth and wonder, their laughter echoing across fields that once only heard the sound of silence. McKinley Grove has become something more than I ever imagined. And so have I. I wake up before the sun most days, not because I have to, but because I want to. There's something sacred about that moment before light breaks, when the world feels still and unformed, like anything could happen. I brew coffee in the old kitchen that now smells like cinnamon and cedar. I walk the porch barefoot and feel the wood warm under my feet. I talk to my mom sometimes, not out loud, just in thought, as I water the flowers we planted together in memories I'll never forget. People ask me if I'm proud, if I feel vindicated, but those aren't the words I use. I feel settled, whole, as if all the fractured parts of me have finally found their place again. I no longer define myself by what was taken from me. I define myself by what I've cultivated, what I've chosen, what I've reclaimed with bare hands and relentless heart. The letters stopped coming. My father never reached out again after that last note. I sometimes hear things, through old family friends, through quiet mentions at the farmer's market. He lives somewhere outside Kansas City now, alone. He sold his business, or what remained of it, and word is, he's mostly kept to himself. I used to imagine what I'd do if he showed up here again, if he parked on the gravel drive and tried to say something. But I don't anymore. I've moved past that chapter. It's not anger that keeps me away. It's peace. True peace doesn't demand confrontation. It just lets go. In the grove beyond the main house, where the wildflowers bloom brightest, I built a bench. It faces east, toward the sunrise, and it's shaded by the oldest tree on the property, the maple that bore witness to everything. I go there often with a book or just a blanket, and I sit, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, sometimes with people who come to visit, who have heard about McKinley Grove through stories or online posts and want to see what it means to start over. A few months ago, a woman named Lillian came all the way from North Carolina. She was in her 50s, wore a green scarf, and carried a notebook filled with poems she'd written about her late sister. She told me she had once owned a piece of land she lost in a legal battle to her brother. She never fought back. She said she hadn't believed she was strong enough, but after reading my story, she started writing again. She started dreaming again. And she said coming here made her feel like maybe it wasn't too late. I told her it never is. People leave notes under the maple now. Not just me. Visitors write letters to loved ones, to lost dreams, to future selves. Some of them I find days later, damp with dew but still legible. Others disappear in the wind. I like to think the land keeps them, that somehow it remembers every footstep, every confession, every whisper of hope planted in its soil. There's a rhythm to this life now, one that doesn't revolve around survival, but around intention, around creating, around choosing joy without apology. I host writing retreats twice a year now. Nothing formal, just a gathering of women who come to reconnect with their stories. We sit in circles on the porch. We write in journals while the sun dances through tree branches. We cry. We laugh. We let go. Sometimes, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, I think about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed silent when she was hurting, the one who thought love meant shrinking, the one who feared she'd never be enough. I want to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything she doesn't yet believe, that her voice matters, that her truth is not too much, that she is not a burden, but a wildfire waiting to rise. I didn't just win land. I won the right to take up space in my own life. The blog is still running, but now it's more than stories about my past. It's letters to the woman I've become, to the community we're building, to anyone out there searching for a way forward. I've published essays, even contributed to a local anthology about resilience. People write to me from around the world, people who've been betrayed, dismissed, silenced. They tell me they see themselves in my words, that they've started speaking up, that they've found the courage to reclaim their names, their stories, their lives. That's what I never expected, that the fire meant to destroy me would become a torch for someone else. Not long ago, a girl named Maya, only 17, visited with her grandmother. She walked the grounds slowly, trailing her fingers through tall grass, pausing to look up at the branches like they were speaking to her. Before she left, she handed me a drawing. It was a sketch of the porch, the house, and me, standing in the doorway, holding a flower in my hand. "You look like someone who saved herself," she said. I looked down at the sketch, and I realized she was right. No one rescued me. No one came to fix it all. I did that. Through the anger, through the grief, through the fear that I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, brave enough. I did that. Because sometimes the only way to survive a fire is to become one. And when I look around now, at the sun-warmed wood of the porch, at the lavender blooming along the path, at the rows of vegetables swaying gently in the wind, I don't see the battlefield anymore. I see home. Not the one I was born into, but the one I fought for, the one I built, the one that rises every day with me in it, whole and unashamed. So if you ever find yourself standing in a field of ruins, wondering if you'll ever feel safe again, if you'll ever stop aching, let me tell you this. You will, but not because someone hands it to you, because you choose it, over and over again. You clear the land, you plant the seeds, you let the sun find you, and one day, without even realizing it, you'll look around and see that everything you thought was broken has grown something wild and beautiful in its place. That's what McKinley Grove is now, not a symbol of what was lost, but a living testament to what can still be found. And I am its keeper, its witness, its voice, its daughter, and I always will be. Have you ever had to fight for something that was already yours, just because someone couldn't stand to see you strong? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey spoke to your heart, please like and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience, healing, and reclaiming identity. Send this video to someone who needs a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to back down. Thank you for being here, and always remember, you don't need permission to take up space in your own life.